I came home after months undercover and opened the garage door. My stomach dropped. The garage was empty. Just dark oil stains on the concrete and Dad's old tools scattered everywhere. Painful reminders of the nights we restored those cars together. My 1967 Mustang Fastback, the one my father rebuilt after Mom died to honor her memory, and my black 1970 Dodge Challenger I'd dreamed of forever, nearly $180,000 in family legacy, towed and crushed at a junkyard for only $500 scrap. All because HOA President Priscilla Hawthorne, a classic power-hungry Karen, called them abandoned. When I confronted her, she smirked and said,
"Those rusty old eyesores were dragging down our property values, Benny. I did the whole neighborhood a favor."
She forged the paperwork and pocketed the fines. She picked the wrong guy. I'm Detective Adrian Blackwood, Auto Theft Division. Now she's under investigation. Got an HOA horror story? Drop your state and the worst below. This revenge gets insane. Stay till the end. Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started. I'm Detective Adrian Blackwood, 15 years on the force, Auto Theft Division. But before I was chasing car thieves, I was that 8-year-old kid handing my dad socket wrenches in our old garage. The smell of Castrol GTX mixed with chrome polish was basically my childhood perfume. Dad was a mechanic who could resurrect any dead engine. After Mom died when I was 12, he threw himself into rebuilding cars. Said the sound of a perfectly tuned V8 drowned out the silence she left behind. We spent every weekend together, our hands permanently stained black, bringing muscle cars back from automotive graveyards. That 1967 Mustang Fastback, Dad bought it as a rusted shell after Mom's funeral. "We're gonna make her beautiful again," he told me, tears mixing with engine grime, "just like your mother would have wanted." And 3 years later, that Fastback was showroom perfect, candy apple red with a 390 V8 that could wake sleeping neighbors 3 blocks away. The Challenger came when I made detective, black as midnight with white racing stripes, 446-pack engine that sounded like God clearing his throat. Dad helped me restore every chrome detail before his heart attack took him 5 years ago. Those cars weren't just vehicles, they were rolling monuments to my parents. Every Saturday, I'd fire up the Fastback and cruise to the cemetery, updating Dad on my cases while that V8 rumbled like he was still there, nodding approval. 3 years ago, I moved to Maplewood Estates thinking I'd found suburban paradise. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, the kind of place where neighbors still wave. The HOA seemed reasonable, standard grass height requirements and quiet hours. Then I met Priscilla Hawthorne and learned that hell hath no fury like a middle-aged woman with a laminated rulebook. Picture someone who considers dandelions a personal attack and measures your mailbox height with an actual tape measure. 58, always dressed for a yacht club brunch, driving a white Lexus she treats like a surgical instrument. 6 years as HOA president had turned her into a suburban dictator with pearls and a permanent scowl. The harassment started immediately. My clean F-150 was commercial looking. My welcome mat was non-regulation color. She actually sent me a certified letter about my doorbell being too loud. Apparently, visitors announcing themselves violated someone's peace. But the real target was my cars. She'd circle my property like a vulture, taking photos through my garage windows when she thought I wasn't home. "Those vintage vehicles might leak hazardous fluids," she'd sniff, pronouncing vintage like it meant diseased. I bent over backward to comply. Garage kept spotless, cars covered, drip pans under everything. I even installed a special ventilation system to address her chemical concerns. Cost me $2,000 to appease her paranoia. Here's what I didn't know. She'd been plotting my removal since day one. See, my corner lot was the biggest in the subdivision, perfect for her son's construction company expansion. But first, she needed the current owner gone. Then came my big break, a 3-month undercover assignment infiltrating a major drug operation. The kind of deep cover work where you disappear completely, become someone else, can't contact anyone from your real life. Before leaving, I locked down everything. Asked Floyd, my retired postal worker neighbor, to watch the house. Prepaid lawn service for 3 months. Left detailed compliance instructions. The cars sat safely in my locked garage, batteries on tenders, covered like sleeping babies. What Priscilla saw was opportunity. What I'd given her was the perfect window to execute her plan. While I was risking my life to keep drugs off the street, she was busy forging violation notices, backdating documents, and stealing the only things I had left of my parents. That empty garage wasn't just a crime scene. It was a declaration of war against a cop who specializes in tracking down stolen vehicles. She'd just made the biggest mistake of her miserable life. The first thing I did was what any good detective does. I investigated. Using department resources, I pulled the sale documentation from Salvage King Auto Parts. The paperwork was sloppier than a drunk driver's field sobriety test. Priscilla had backdated violation notices by 2 weeks and forged my signature on a voluntary surrender form I'd never seen. I remembered something from my rookie training about HOA disputes. Most state laws require 30-day written notice plus certified mail delivery before any vehicle removal. My sergeant used to joke that HOA presidents think they're above the law until they meet actual law enforcement. Priscilla had skipped both requirements and simply fabricated a paper trail after committing grand theft. I drove to her house that evening, still in uniform from my shift. She was hosting her weekly book club meeting, 5 other suburban vultures clutching wine glasses like talons. Through the bay window, I could see them dissecting some romance novel with the same vicious precision they used to destroy their neighbors' lives. The doorbell's chime echoed through her marble foyer like a funeral bell. When Priscilla answered, her vanilla-scented perfume mixed with cheap Chardonnay hit me like a chemical weapon designed to suffocate common sense. "Detective Blackwood," she cooed, loud enough for her audience of enablers. "How wonderful that you're back safely. I do hope you understand the difficult position the HOA was in regarding your abandoned property." Abandoned? I was gone 3 months on official police business. Oh, but the vehicles were leaking fluids onto the concrete. She produced her phone, showing photos of what looked like oil puddles. Except I recognized those stains. They were watermarks from my sprinkler system hitting the garage entrance. "Priscilla, those are water stains from..." I'm afraid the board voted unanimously. Emergency health hazard removal was necessary to protect property values. She waved documents like she was conducting a symphony of lies. Her book club friends nodded along like dashboard bobbleheads. Amazing how quickly people support evil when it comes with wine and cheese platters. But here's where she got drunk on power and made her first critical error. "Really, Adrian, you should thank me. Those rusty old things were dragging down everyone's home values. The scrapyard actually paid the HOA for removal, covered all your outstanding violations plus administrative fees." "What violations? I followed every rule in your little handbook." She smiled like a shark smelling blood. "Storage of commercial vehicles, improper fluid containment, excessive noise during maintenance hours." Each fabricated charge rolled off her tongue smoother than aged bourbon. That's when the pieces clicked. This wasn't just about my cars. This was a systematic con game. The next morning, I visited Salvage King Auto Parts. The smell of rust and motor oil hung in the air like incense in a mechanic's cathedral. Big Eddie Kowalski, the owner, was a human mountain with permanently stained fingernails and the communication skills of a crowbar. "Look, detective, I got legal paperwork," he grunted, producing Priscilla's forged authorization. "Lady says she's property manager, shows documents, I pay cash. Business is business." The Mustang had already been gutted like a fish. My father's custom headers, the ones we'd bent by hand in his garage 20 years ago, were gone. Some collector in Nevada had bought the original 390 engine for $8,000. Each missing piece felt like they were harvesting my memories for spare parts. "Where's the Challenger?" Eddie pointed toward the back lot where my black beauty sat covered in rust-colored dust, waiting for the crusher like a condemned prisoner. At least she was intact. But seeing her in that automotive graveyard felt like visiting my own funeral. "You want her back? You pay what's owed plus storage. $1,500 total." $1,500 to buy back my own stolen property. The sheer audacity could power a small city. I filed the theft report anyway, technically investigating my own case, which felt like performing surgery on myself. Security footage from 3 neighborhood cameras showed Priscilla entering my garage with bolt cutters at 2 a.m., clear as day, breaking and entering. When I tried presenting this evidence to the HOA board, guess who controlled the meeting agenda? "I'm sorry, detective, but this matter has been resolved through proper channels," Priscilla announced from her throne at the head of the conference table. "Emergency removal was documented and voted upon unanimously." "By what board? I see 4 people here and 3 look scared to breathe." She'd packed the meeting with her book club accomplices, replacing actual elected members with personal cheerleaders. The whole system was more rigged than a traveling carnival. Then she dropped her nuclear option. "I've filed a formal complaint with your police department regarding harassment and intimidation," she announced with Oscar-worthy drama. "Using your badge to threaten private citizens is a serious federal offense." 3 days later, Internal Affairs called. Captain Rodriguez had to treat her complaint seriously, even though we both knew it was garbage. "Marcus, you can't investigate your own theft case. It's a conflict of interest." She'd turned my greatest asset, my badge, into my biggest liability. Game, set, match to the suburban sociopath. Priscilla wasn't done playing games. She was doubling down like a desperate gambler. 2 days after my internal affairs interview, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. The certified mail notice arrived with all the pomp of a royal decree, announcing a special session to address ongoing neighborhood security concerns. I showed up to find the community center packed tighter than a Black Friday sale. Priscilla had mobilized her entire army. Book club members, bridge partners, even the FedEx guy looked nervous. She'd transformed what should have been a simple dispute into the suburban equivalent of a witch trial. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, standing behind a podium like she was addressing Congress, "we face an unprecedented threat to our community's safety and property values." Her PowerPoint presentation would have impressed a Fortune 500 boardroom. Slide after slide of evidence. Photos of my garage with dramatic arrows pointing to normal car supplies. Close-ups of legal car covers labeled as suspicious concealment. Even pictures of my toolbox described as potential weapons cache. The acrid smell of her aggressive floral perfume mixed with nervous sweat from the crowd created an atmosphere thick enough to slice with a butter knife. You could practically taste the manufactured terror hanging in the recycled air. "Detective Blackwood has been storing hazardous chemicals in direct violation of residential safety codes," she announced, pointing to photos of my brake fluid and motor oil. "Improperly contained automotive fluids pose serious environmental risks." I remembered a fraud seminar where the instructor warned about people who weaponize legitimate rules through malicious interpretation. Priscilla had turned standard HOA bylaws into a persecution manual with color-coded tabs. Mrs. Henderson, an 80-year-old widow, raised a trembling hand. "But Priscilla, my late husband Harold, kept the same supplies for 40 years. "That was different, dear. Harold wasn't resistant to community standards." The coded language hit like a brick through a window. She was painting me as the dangerous outsider, the unstable cop who couldn't follow simple suburban etiquette. Then came her legal atomic bomb. "After thorough investigation, I've discovered that Mr. Blackwood owes $2,400 in accumulated violations dating back 18 months. She produced documentation thick enough to stop bullets, all properly recorded and legally enforceable. Every violation was backdated, every fine fabricated, every signature forged with surgical precision. But the paperwork looked official enough to fool Supreme Court justices, certainly convincing enough to terrify retirees who just wanted peaceful golden years. But I wasn't sitting idle while she torched my reputation. 3 nights of detective work revealed her dirty secret. Over 36 months, she'd run identical scams against 6 different homeowners, always targeting single men, frequently minorities or veterans. The pattern was clearer than blood spatter at a crime scene. Each victim faced her standardized playbook: escalating violations, emergency removals, forced asset seizures, total recovered fees, $18,000. But here's what made my blood boil. Priscilla collected 15% commission on all administrative recoveries through her unlicensed property management consulting business. She was running a protection racket disguised as neighborhood stewardship. When I tried interviewing previous victims, most had fled rather than fight. Miguel Santos, a Navy veteran, met me at a coffee shop downtown, constantly checking over his shoulder like we were exchanging state secrets. "She destroyed my boat the same way, hermano. Waited until I deployed, then claimed it was abandoned maritime equipment. Cost me 12 grand and my sanity." That's when Priscilla deployed her nuclear option. The restraining order arrived via process server while I was pressure washing my driveway. Ironic timing, since maintaining clean concrete was apparently one of her obsessions. Temporary protection order claiming I'd been stalking and harassing her, supported by sworn affidavits from 3 book club members who testified I'd driven past her house in a threatening manner. The beautiful absurdity: I lived 3 houses down. Driving past her house was literally unavoidable unless I sprouted wings or learned to teleport. But the legal reality crushed harder than a hydraulic press. 500-foot restraining order meant I couldn't attend HOA meetings, couldn't approach the community mailbox, couldn't even walk my non-existent dog without risking arrest. She'd turned my own neighborhood into a legal prison where I was the only inmate. Standing there with court papers fluttering in the breeze, watching water evaporate from my spotless driveway, I realized her true genius. She wasn't just stealing property, she was systematically destroying anyone who might challenge her suburban dictatorship. But Priscilla had made one crucial miscalculation. Every fraudulent move she made was creating evidence. Every forged signature, every fabricated violation, every abuse of power was building the federal case that would eventually obliterate her. She thought she was playing chess while I stumbled around playing checkers. What she didn't know was that I'd been building a criminal investigation from day one, and her restraining order had just given me the final piece of evidence I needed to prove conspiracy and racketeering. The hunter had become the hunted, and she didn't even know it yet. If I thought Priscilla was done escalating, I had about as much insight as a goldfish trying to understand quantum physics. 2 weeks after the restraining order, she launched a psychological warfare campaign that would have impressed North Korean propagandists. It started with the neighborhood newsletter, a glossy publication she wielded like a literary machete. The headline screamed, "Community Safety Alert When Neighbors Become Threats." She didn't mention my name directly, but the implications hit like a freight train carrying lawsuits. Recent incidents involving a local law enforcement officer have raised serious concerns about combat-related stress disorders, she wrote with Oscar-worthy fake sympathy. Military and police personnel sometimes struggle with civilian reintegration, leading to property obsessions and aggressive confrontations with lawful authority. The smell of fresh ink from her character assassination mixed with my boiling rage created an atmosphere that could have powered a small nuclear reactor. She'd turned my service record into a guided missile aimed at my reputation. Within days, neighbors started treating me like I had "dangerous lunatic" tattooed across my forehead. Mrs. Patterson, who used to chat about her prize-winning roses, suddenly developed a fascinating interest in her shoelaces whenever I appeared. Even the FedEx guy started leaving packages at the curb like my front door might explode. But social exile wasn't enough for our suburban dictator. She wanted total annihilation. The Facebook post went viral faster than a celebrity scandal. Posted in 3 different neighborhood groups, Priscilla shared genuine concerns about my erratic behavior and unhealthy obsession with vintage vehicles. The comment section transformed into a digital kangaroo court. Jennifer Walsh, whose greatest achievement was organizing potluck dinners, wrote, "I always suspected those loud cars were compensation for inadequacy issues." Dave Morrison, a man who called police about teenagers breathing too loudly, added, "Officers can snap without warning. We must protect our families from unstable individuals." The beautiful irony? They were debating my danger level while I spent every shift literally protecting their comfortable suburban existence from actual criminals. That's when my unlikely savior emerged from the mailbox conspiracy. Floyd Jenkins appeared at my door holding a manila envelope like it contained state secrets. His weathered postal worker face carried the expression of someone who'd witnessed federal crimes for months without realizing their significance. "Marcus, I've been documenting something that'll blow this wide open," he whispered, checking for surveillance like we were Cold War spies. 6 months of evidence that Priscilla's been tampering with federal mail. The photographs inside were better than Christmas morning. Shot after shot of Priscilla intercepting certified letters from the community mailbox, steaming open HOA violation notices to prevent legal responses, and disposing of resident appeals in her personal garbage. Federal mail tampering carries 5 years in prison. Floyd had accidentally built a federal case while I was drowning in restraining orders and psychological evaluations. "She steals people's legal mail to prevent them from fighting her bogus violations," Floyd explained. "I documented everything because postal tampering is serious business, but I didn't connect it to your situation until now." This was the evidence I needed, but Priscilla had one more nuclear weapon to deploy. Her masterstroke came via my department's community relations officer. A formal complaint expressing grave concerns about my fitness for duty, suggesting my property obsession, and resistance to civilian authority indicated dangerous psychological instability. Detective Blackwood appears unable to transition from military-style thinking to community civilian standards, her letter stated with surgical precision. His aggressive response to routine enforcement suggests combat-related stress disorders that pose public safety risks. Captain Rodriguez delivered the news with the enthusiasm of someone announcing terminal cancer. "Marcus, you're the most stable cop I know, but these allegations require a full psychological evaluation. Department policy." She'd weaponized mental health stigma like a heat-seeking missile aimed at my career. Every calculated word was designed to sound concerned while systematically destroying my professional life. But her fatal mistake came from pure greed and overconfidence. Priscilla contacted real estate agent Rebecca Martinez about foreclosing my property, claiming I owed $8,000 in accumulated fees and would be forced into bankruptcy sale within 30 days. "Prime corner lot with development potential," she explained over country club martinis. "Current owner is psychologically unstable. Perfect opportunity for below-market acquisition through my son's investment company." Here's where her master plan hit a concrete wall at 90 miles per hour. Rebecca Martinez was married to Detective Luis Martinez from my precinct. Rebecca found the conversation disturbing enough to mention over dinner. Luis called me immediately. "Hermano, some crazy HOA lady tried getting my wife to list your house for foreclosure. She's planning to buy it through shell companies for pennies on the dollar." The conspiracy crystallized like puzzle pieces falling into perfect formation. This wasn't random harassment. It was orchestrated real estate fraud designed to steal my property for her son's construction empire. She'd evolved from petty neighborhood tyrant to federal criminal mastermind. Now I had witnesses, federal crimes, mail tampering evidence, and clear financial motive. The trap was set, and Priscilla had just walked directly into federal prosecution territory. Sometimes justice arrives in the most mundane packages. In my case, it came disguised as Floyd's innocent mistake, a misdirected certified letter that would detonate Priscilla's entire criminal empire. The envelope felt heavier than it should have as Floyd handed it over with apologetic shrugs. "Sorry, Adrian. Got mixed up with the mail sorting. Muscle memory from 30 years on the route." The return address made my stomach drop. "Adams County Tax Authority. Final notice." I almost walked it over to Priscilla's house, restraining order be damned, but something made me pause. The detective in me whispered that evidence sometimes arrives when you least expect it. Inside was a tax lien notice that hit like a freight train loaded with karma. $47,000 in unpaid federal taxes, 3 years delinquent, asset seizure authorized, criminal prosecution pending. The paper trembled in my hands as the implications crashed over me like cold water. I could smell the stale coffee from my morning cup mixing with the acrid taste of pure adrenaline as my brain connected the dots. During a community policing seminar years ago, some boring instructor had droned on about HOA governance requirements. One detail stuck because it seemed so obvious. Board members must be residents in good standing with no outstanding liens or judgments. My laptop practically smoked as I pulled up Maplewood Estates' original master deed. Article 7, Section 3. Buried like treasure in legal jargon. Board members must maintain good standing status, defined as current on all financial obligations including federal, state, and local taxes. The words on the screen blurred as the magnitude hit me. Priscilla had been serving illegally for 3 years. Every decision, every fee, every violation, all legally void. She'd been playing dictator while dodging federal tax collectors like a common criminal. Her divorce records painted an even uglier picture. Ordered to pay her ex-husband's restaurant debts totaling $47,000. IRS liens on her property. Bank accounts frozen. She wasn't just power hungry. She was desperate, using stolen HOA funds to avoid federal prison. My cars weren't theft victims. They were liquidated assets in her personal bankruptcy scheme. The scope was breathtaking. Fraudulent fees across 6 communities, all collected while legally disqualified from serving. Mail tampering to prevent appeals. Real estate fraud to steal properties, tax evasion with criminal charges pending. She wasn't an evil HOA president. She was a federal fugitive using suburban authority as her escape route. I called Agent Sarah Sterling at FBI White Collar Crime, my hands still shaking from adrenaline overload. "Marcus, you're describing organized criminal enterprise under RICO statutes," she said, after reviewing my evidence summary. "Mail fraud, tax evasion, racketeering. We can seize everything, house, cars, jewelry, all assets acquired through criminal activity." The beautiful irony was intoxicating. RICO forfeiture means everything she'd bought with stolen money would be confiscated to compensate victims. Her white Lexus, her country club jewelry, her perfectly manicured house, all of it purchased with our money, all of it subject to federal seizure. But here's what made me laugh out loud for the first time in months. My role had transformed overnight from helpless victim to key federal witness. My badge went from liability to prosecution asset faster than her fake authority could issue bogus violations. She'd spent months trying to destroy a cop, not realizing she was actually providing a federal investigator with documented evidence for an airtight criminal case. Every restraining order, every character assassination attempt, every illegal move had been creating the paper trail that would send her to federal prison. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had completely inverted. Priscilla thought she was crushing a neighbor. She'd actually been building her own federal prosecution case, one felony at a time. The next 72 hours felt like preparing for the Super Bowl, the World Series, and my own wedding simultaneously, assuming my wedding involved federal prosecutors and potential prison sentences for the bride. My dining room transformed into a command center that would have made CIA analysts jealous. Evidence packets covered every surface like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle depicting someone's complete destruction. The smell of fresh printer ink mixed with cold Chinese takeout and pure determination created an atmosphere you could bottle and sell as ode to justice. First stop, bulletproof legal strategy with some actual legal firepower. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, thankfully not the neighborhood Facebook warrior with the same name, reviewed my evidence over coffee that tasted like liquid vindication. Her kitchen table groaned under the weight of 3 years' worth of documented crimes. "Marcus, this goes way beyond petty theft," she said, shuffling documents like cards in a high-stakes poker game. "Mail tampering carries 5 years federal time. Tax evasion adds another 5. RICO charges for criminal enterprise? She's looking at a decade in orange jumpsuits. We organized everything chronologically. 47 families victimized, $73,000 stolen across 6 communities, every forged signature photographed with forensic precision. The evidence was so overwhelming that even public defenders would recommend plea bargaining. But paperwork alone wouldn't satisfy my need for dramatic justice. I needed to catch her red-handed. Setting up surveillance in my own garage felt like preparing for a nature documentary about suburban predators. I installed military-grade trail cameras in hidden positions, motion-activated systems running on batteries that could record crystal-clear video for weeks. Years ago, a burglary detective taught me that most property crimes solve themselves if you just give criminals enough rope to hang themselves with. Battery-powered trail cameras cost under $300 and provide time-stamped evidence that federal courts love. Property owners can legally record anything happening on their land, and the footage holds up better than eyewitness testimony. The bait strategy required some creative storytelling worthy of a Hollywood screenplay. I started spreading rumors through Floyd's postal network about a rare 1970 Honda CB750 motorcycle sitting in my garage, supposedly worth $25,000, and just begging to be administratively recovered by an enterprising HOA president funding her tax debt. The story was pure fiction, but irresistible to someone who'd already stolen $180,000 worth of my actual vehicles. Meanwhile, I was assembling an army that Priscilla never saw coming. Floyd worked his neighborhood connections like a political campaign manager, quietly identifying victims across 3 subdivisions. Mrs. Sterling, whose deployed son's car disappeared for commercial vehicle violations. The Rodriguez family, charged $200 for landscaping non-compliance while serving overseas. Miguel Santos, whose boat became abandoned maritime equipment overnight. Our secure WhatsApp group, Maplewood Truth, grew to 37 residents sharing horror stories that revealed the full scope of her operation. The pattern was clearer than fingerprints at a crime scene. She targeted vulnerable families when they couldn't fight back. The federal coordination made me feel like a detective in a Hollywood thriller, except the bureaucracy was definitely more boring than Tom Cruise movies suggest. Agent Sarah Sterling walked me through RICO prosecution requirements over lunch that tasted like future headlines. "Think of this like building a murder case," she explained, picking at her salad with surgical precision. "Every piece of evidence must be perfect, every witness credible, every document authenticated. Defense attorneys will attack any microscopic weakness like sharks smelling blood." We synchronized with postal inspectors for mail fraud, IRS criminal investigators for tax evasion, and local prosecutors for theft charges. The investigation was becoming a multi-agency task force with Priscilla as the star defendant. But the psychological warfare required Oscar-worthy acting skills. I started appearing defeated around the neighborhood. Boxes visible through windows, furniture listed online, playing the role of a broken man preparing to surrender. The performance had to convince Priscilla she'd won while being subtle enough not to alert her flying monkeys. Media coordination felt like planning a surprise party, except the surprise was federal felony charges. Channel 7's investigative reporter Maria Santos specialized in municipal corruption exposés. HOA abuse is epidemic statewide, she told me during our clandestine coffee meeting. Most residents don't realize these boards wield enormous legal power with virtually zero oversight. Your case could trigger legislative reforms. We scheduled news coverage during the planned confrontation, ensuring cameras would capture everything for both public education and legal evidence. The financial forensics revealed a money trail so obvious it practically glowed in the dark. Bank records showed Priscilla's deposits matching stolen fees within days of each theft. Her tax payments to the IRS corresponded exactly with major property seizures. Even first-year law students could connect these dots with crayons. Federal prosecutors could trace every stolen dollar from victim properties through her accounts to government payments, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence that would survive any legal challenge. Sitting surrounded by evidence at 2 a.m., cameras armed, agents coordinated, victims organized, media prepared, one thought dominated my exhausted mind. Priscilla had spent 3 years unknowingly building the federal case that would destroy her. Now I just had to spring the perfect trap. If I thought Priscilla was desperate before, I clearly underestimated the lengths a cornered criminal would go to protect her crumbling empire. Her final gambit arrived via certified mail that practically reeked of desperation and expensive legal paper. She'd filed a formal complaint with the state police licensing board, claiming I was mentally unfit for law enforcement duties due to property-related psychological disorders. The complaint read like a psychiatric textbook written by someone who'd never opened one. Detective Blackwood displays obsessive-compulsive behaviors regarding vintage automobiles, suggesting deeper psychological instability that compromises his judgment and public safety responsibilities. She was trying to destroy my career to end my investigation. The nuclear option of suburban warfare. But her strategy backfired spectacularly. The state licensing board forwarded her complaint to my department for review, which meant Captain Rodriguez got to read 3 pages of amateur psychology theories about my automotive fetishism and authority resistance syndrome. I could hear him laughing through his office door when he called me in. "Marcus, either you're the most creatively insane cop in department history or someone's trying very hard to discredit you," he said, sliding the complaint across his desk like evidence in a comedy trial. "Given that internal affairs just cleared you of all previous allegations, I'm thinking option 2. The licensing board's investigation lasted exactly 48 hours. Turns out they don't appreciate receiving psychological evaluations from unlicensed HOA presidents with pending federal tax evasion charges. Who knew? Meanwhile, my bait strategy was working perfectly. The trail cameras captured Priscilla conducting surveillance of my garage at 3 a.m., using a flashlight to peer through windows like some suburban cat burglar. The infrared footage showed her testing door locks and photographing my valuable motorcycle project, which was actually just an old lawnmower covered with a tarp. But she wasn't working alone anymore. Her son Derek had joined the family crime business, bringing lawyer credentials and professional-grade stupidity to their operation. Security footage caught them both casing my property, with Derek taking measurements and notes while Priscilla provided illegal entry expertise. The irony was delicious. A lawyer was helping his mother commit federal felonies while documenting everything for prosecutors. 3 nights later, they made their move. Motion sensors triggered at 2:47 a.m. as Priscilla and Derek entered my garage using bolt cutters on the side door. The cameras captured everything in high-definition detail, her directing him toward the covered motorcycle, his nervous fumbling with locks, both of them discussing how to transport stolen property without witnesses. "This should cover Mom's next tax payment," Derek whispered, apparently unaware that conspiracy charges apply equally to amateur and professional criminals. They spent 20 minutes photographing serial numbers and calculating resale values for property that didn't exist. The footage was so incriminating that federal prosecutors could probably use it as training material for how not to commit crimes. But Priscilla's desperation reached truly pathological levels when she realized the motorcycle was fake. The next morning, she launched a character assassination campaign that would have impressed totalitarian dictators. Phone calls to every neighbor claiming I'd been staging fake evidence to frame innocent HOA board members. Letters to local businesses warning them about my dangerous psychological instability. Even complaints to the mayor's office about rogue police officers terrorizing suburban communities. She was burning every bridge while standing on them. The tactical genius of someone who'd watched too many soap operas and confused them with legal strategy. Her crowning achievement of self-destruction came during an emergency HOA meeting she called to address the ongoing terrorist campaign against community leadership. 43 residents packed the community center to hear Priscilla explain how I'd supposedly orchestrated an elaborate frame job involving federal agencies, forged tax documents, and manufactured evidence. The conspiracy theory was so complex, it required flowcharts and multiple timelines. Detective Blackwood has enlisted postal inspectors, IRS agents, and FBI investigators in a personal vendetta against lawful HOA governance, she announced, with the confidence of someone explaining that gravity was optional. The audience sat in stunned silence as she detailed how I'd allegedly convinced federal agencies to fabricate evidence, forge tax liens, and manufacture criminal charges just to avoid paying legitimate HOA fees. Mrs. Henderson, the 80-year-old widow, finally raised her hand with trembling fingers. "Priscilla, dear, are you saying that Detective Blackwood somehow convinced the Internal Revenue Service to fake your tax problems?" "Exactly. He's using his police connections to weaponize federal bureaucracy against private citizens." The room erupted in nervous laughter that sounded like air escaping from a punctured balloon. Even her most loyal supporters were starting to recognize that their fearless leader had crossed the line from neighborhood dictator to clinical paranoia. But the beautiful part was that every word of her meltdown was being recorded by hidden federal surveillance equipment, providing prosecutors with perfect evidence of her mental state and criminal intent. She thought she was defending herself against false accusations. She was actually providing a real-time confession to federal investigators who were building an airtight case for organized crime charges. Priscilla's final act wasn't just desperate. It was the kind of spectacular self-destruction that criminal justice textbooks would study for decades. She arrived at what she thought would be my public execution wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying a leather briefcase stuffed with what she believed was my death warrant. Her son Derek followed behind like a reluctant accomplice, dragging a rolling suitcase full of legal documents and barely concealed terror. The community center was packed beyond fire code limits. Word had spread through neighborhood networks faster than gossip at a high school reunion. 57 residents filled every seat, with another dozen standing along the walls. The smell of nervous anticipation mixed with industrial carpet cleaner created an atmosphere thick enough to slice with a butter knife. "Ladies and gentlemen," Priscilla began, positioning herself behind the podium like a prosecutor addressing a jury, "tonight we end a reign of terror that has plagued our community for months." She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation that would have impressed corporate boardrooms if it wasn't completely insane. Slide after slide detailed my supposed criminal conspiracy involving federal agencies, forged tax documents, and manufactured evidence designed to frame innocent HOA leadership. Detective Blackwood has weaponized his police connections to orchestrate the most elaborate revenge scheme in suburban history, she announced with the dramatic flair of someone auditioning for community theater. "Tonight, we expose the truth and restore lawful governance to Maplewood Estates." The audience shifted uncomfortably as she clicked through slides showing evidence of my alleged conspiracy. Photos of federal agents conducting fake investigations, screenshots of fabricated tax liens, even testimony from expert witnesses, her book club members, about my unstable psychological profile. Derek stood beside her like a deer caught in headlights, occasionally nodding when she looked his way but otherwise appearing ready to bolt for the nearest exit. His law degree was probably burning a hole in his conscience as he watched his mother commit career suicide in real time. "Furthermore," Priscilla continued, her voice rising with messianic fervor, "I have obtained legal authority to initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings against Detective Blackwood's property for accumulated violations totaling $8,400. She produced a stack of documents with the theatrical flourish of a magician revealing a rabbit, except this rabbit was actually a federal felony in disguise. These legally binding judgments authorize the HOA to seize and auction his property to recover community funds stolen through his fraudulent appeals and illegal resistance to lawful authority. The foreclosure paperwork was her masterpiece of criminal stupidity. Every signature forged, every date backdated, every legal citation completely fabricated. She'd created evidence of fraud so obvious that even traffic court judges could spot it from space. But the truly beautiful part was happening in the back of the room, where Agent Sarah Sterling sat disguised as a concerned neighbor, recording everything through equipment that looked like a purse but functioned like a federal wiretapping operation. I call upon this community to support immediate enforcement of these legal judgments, Priscilla declared, raising her voice like a revival preacher calling for salvation. We cannot allow rogue police officers to terrorize law-abiding citizens with impunity. That's when I decided to make my entrance. I'd been sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes, listening through wireless surveillance equipment as she built the federal prosecution case against herself. Every word was being recorded by multiple agencies for use in criminal proceedings that would probably last longer than her remaining natural life. Walking through the community center doors felt like stepping onto a movie set where I was somehow both the victim and the star. The crowd turned in unison as I appeared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright fear, depending on which version of recent events they believed. "Detective Blackwood!" Priscilla shrieked, pointing at me like I was carrying plague bacteria. "You're violating the restraining order by being within 500 feet of HOA proceedings." "Actually," I said, pulling out my badge with deliberate slowness, "that restraining order was invalidated this morning when federal prosecutors filed criminal charges against you for mail fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear individual heartbeats echoing off the walls. "What you've been witnessing tonight," I continued, addressing the crowd while Priscilla's face cycled through colors not found in nature, "is a criminal confession to federal felonies being recorded by FBI surveillance equipment." Agent Sterling stood up in the back, showing her credentials like a reveal in a crime drama finale. Derek dropped his suitcase with a crash that sounded like justice hitting the floor. And Priscilla, for the first time in 3 years, was completely speechless as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a tsunami of consequences she'd been building for herself, one crime at a time. The trap had officially snapped shut. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap until Priscilla found her voice, which unfortunately for her, sounded like a smoke detector with dying batteries. "This is entrapment!" she shrieked, her perfectly styled hair beginning to wilt under the heat of federal surveillance. "You can't use police resources for personal vendettas." I walked to the front of the room with the confidence of someone holding a royal flush in a poker game full of people playing with Uno cards. Behind me, Agent Sterling was already coordinating with backup agents positioned around the building. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, turning to address the stunned audience. "For the past 3 months, you've been witnessing a federal criminal investigation into HOA fraud, mail tampering, and organized theft across 6 communities in our county." I unfolded the evidence poster I'd prepared, a timeline showing 3 years of Priscilla's crimes with photographs, bank records, and victim testimonials. The visual impact hit the crowd like a physical blow. Gasps echoed through the room as neighbors recognized their own experiences in the documented pattern. "Mrs. Hawthorne has been operating illegally as HOA president while owing $47,000 in federal taxes," I continued, watching her face cycle through colors not found in any natural spectrum. "Every fee collected, every violation issued, every property seized over the past 3 years has been legally void." "That's impossible," Derek stammered, finally finding his voice and immediately regretting it. "My mother has served this community faithfully for 6 years. Agent Sterling stepped forward, her FBI credentials catching the fluorescent light like a badge of divine justice. "Mr. Hawthorne, you're also under federal investigation for conspiracy, money laundering, and aiding criminal enterprise. I'd recommend exercising your right to remain silent." The crowd was beginning to understand they'd been watching a real-time criminal investigation unfold. Mrs. Henderson clutched her pearls like prayer beads while Mr. Rodriguez pulled out his phone to start recording. But Priscilla wasn't finished destroying herself. "You people are idiots if you believe this fabricated nonsense," she screamed, her composure evaporating like water on hot asphalt. I saved this neighborhood from property value destruction. Those cars were rusting eyesores that needed removal. She was confessing to theft on federal surveillance equipment while insulting the jury of neighbors who would eventually testify against her. I did what was necessary to protect our investments, she continued, apparently unaware that admitting criminal intent while being recorded was probably not covered in any HOA handbook. Sometimes leadership requires making difficult decisions. That's when Floyd stepped forward from the crowd, holding an envelope thick with evidence. Priscilla, these are photographs of you stealing mail from the community mailbox for 6 months, he announced, his postal worker authority carrying the weight of federal law. Mail tampering is a federal felony punishable by 5 years in prison. He spread the photographs across the front table like playing cards, revealing a winning hand, shot after shot of Priscilla intercepting certified letters, opening resident mail, disposing of legal documents in her personal trash. The visual evidence was devastating. Even Derek looked ready to request witness protection from his own mother. Furthermore, I added, pulling out bank records that Agent Sterling had helped me prepare, these financial documents show every dollar stolen from residents being deposited into Mrs. Hawthorne's account and transferred directly to the IRS for tax payments. The money trail was so obvious it could be followed by blindfolded accountants. Theft from neighbors, immediate bank deposits, same-day transfers to federal tax payments. Even criminal defense attorneys would recommend pleading guilty to avoid embarrassing trials. Channel 7's news crew chose that moment to reveal themselves, emerging from strategic positions around the room with cameras that had been recording everything for the evening broadcast. "This is Maria Santos with Channel 7 News," the reporter announced, stepping forward with a microphone that gleamed like Excalibur. "We're here covering what appears to be the largest HOA fraud investigation in county history." That's when Priscilla completely lost whatever remained of her sanity. "Turn those cameras off!" she screamed, lunging toward the news crew like a rabid suburban housewife defending her territory. "This is a private HOA meeting. You have no right to be here." Security footage would later show her attempting to assault a journalist while being recorded by federal surveillance equipment, adding additional charges to an already impressive criminal collection. Derek tried to restrain his mother while simultaneously distancing himself from her crimes, creating a spectacle that would probably win awards for most pathetic legal defense strategy. "Mrs. Priscilla Hawthorne," Agent Sterling announced with the formality of federal justice, "you're under arrest for mail fraud, tax evasion, theft, and operating a criminal enterprise under RICO statutes." The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that echoed like church bells announcing the end of a very long, very corrupt sermon. Justice had officially been served with a side of public humiliation and a federal prosecution appetizer. 6 months later, I was standing in my restored garage, breathing in the familiar smell of Castrol GTX and satisfaction, watching my father's Mustang purr like it had 20 years ago. Priscilla's federal sentencing had been everything I'd dreamed of, and more. 6 years in federal prison, $300,000 in restitution across all communities, and asset forfeiture that stripped her of everything purchased with stolen funds. Her white Lexus, her country club jewelry, even her precious HOA podium, all seized to compensate victims. Derek received 2 years for conspiracy, plus disbarment from practicing law. Turns out helping your mother commit federal felonies isn't covered under attorney-client privilege, despite what desperate legal defenses might claim. The community transformation was remarkable. Our emergency HOA election replaced Priscilla's book club dictatorship with actual democratic governance. Financial transparency became mandatory, with monthly reports published online for all residents. The new board chair, Mrs. Sterling, instituted voting rights education sessions that turned our subdivision into a model of suburban democracy. But the real victory was personal healing. Insurance settlements covered my stolen vehicles, and the community fundraiser added $15,000 for restoration costs. Local auto clubs donated rare parts that would have taken years to find. The Mustang rebuild became a neighborhood project, with residents stopping by to share stories about their own fathers and the cars that connected generations. Miguel Santos, the Navy veteran whose boat was stolen, became my restoration partner. Turns out 30 years of military engineering creates pretty impressive automotive skills. Working together on the Challenger's engine rebuild felt like therapy disguised as weekend fun. The federal investigation expanded statewide after my case went public. 17 other HOA presidents were arrested for similar schemes, and the state legislature passed the Maplewood Accountability Act, requiring financial audits and conflict of interest disclosures for all community associations. I testified before state lawmakers about HOA reform, explaining how ordinary residents could protect themselves from suburban dictators with laminated rulebooks and criminal intentions. The legislation included whistleblower protections and streamlined appeals processes that would prevent future Priscilla situations. The social good initiative became my proudest achievement. Victim compensation funds established the Veterans Auto Restoration Scholarship, $50,000 annually for military families pursuing automotive careers. Partnership with the local technical college provided training programs that honored my father's memory while helping veterans transition to civilian life through hands-on mechanical education. The scholarship recipients work on classic car projects donated by community members, learning restoration skills while preserving automotive history. Dad would have loved seeing young veterans discovering the therapeutic power of bringing dead engines back to life. My personal life finally started rebuilding too. At the scholarship program's first car show, I met Sarah Mitchell, a Marine veteran studying diesel mechanics through our program. She was rebuilding a 1969 Camaro Z28 that had belonged to her grandfather, sharing the same connection between family memory and automotive restoration that had driven my own passion. Our first date was appropriately unconventional, troubleshooting her carburetor problems while sharing stories about the people who'd taught us to love cars. Romance built on mutual respect for Detroit muscle and family legacy felt perfect. The annual Freedom Day Festival became a regional attraction celebrating the victory of community democracy over suburban tyranny. Classic car shows, educational booths teaching HOA rights, and live music created an event that brought thousands of visitors and significant revenue to local businesses. Channel 7's documentary about the investigation won a regional Emmy for investigative journalism, and Maria Santos used the platform to expose municipal corruption statewide. Our story became a template for investigating organized fraud in community governance. My police department created an HOA fraud unit based on techniques developed during Priscilla's investigation. I now train officers across the state in recognizing and prosecuting community-based financial crimes, turning my personal nightmare into professional expertise that protects other residents. The ripple effects continue spreading through improved legislation, protected communities, and veterans finding purpose through automotive education programs that honor service while building practical skills. Standing in my garage every Saturday morning, listening to the Mustang's perfectly tuned V8 rumble while Sarah works on her Camaro nearby, I'm reminded that fighting injustice